All right, sorry about the wait, little technical difficulties. But yeah, we're going to get started now. Welcome to the holiday tasting. My name is Silas, and I'm a fine wine specialist at the Chicago Wine Company. So the kind of impetus behind this tasting was, you know, the love of the holidays and the wines that we celebrate the holidays with. These wines are really pretty standard in many dinner tables like Beaujolais, Pinot Noir, things like that. But usually we, with such influx of people, we're trying to go for bargain. And obviously with, COVID and all the restrictions, trying to stay healthy, a lot of our celebrations are curtailed this year. So we thought we would, bring a lot of the traditional wines and really highlight kind of up and coming producers or traditional, old traditionalists that just make the most compelling, in our opinion, the most compelling examples of these extremely traditional, holiday wines. So for instance, I'm going to start you off with the Bourgogne-Aligoté. And let's start off by just taking a good sip of this wine. I think you guys have waited long enough. So I'm a huge fan of Aligoté. Right off the bat, quite a bit of acid, but it's not too lean. So it has some ripeness, it has some fruit, has some the buttery notes you might associate with a white Burgundy, and that's exactly what this is. It's a white Burgundy, but the grape is not Chardonnay, and it has some of the hallmarks of Chardonnay, but it is a lot zestier. It has a lot more acid. And very, very mineral driven, but not without a little plushness towards the back end. So this grape, Aligoté, is kind of the forgotten grape of Burgundy. It's a close relative of Chardonnay, and in the past centuries, it was heavily planted, and it was more of like an early drinking aperitif wine. Obviously, lighter in body than the traditional, Burgundian Chardonnay. With the acid, it's really great with food, and that's what makes it, in my opinion, a great wine for Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving fare tends to be, relatively rich and fatty, but not quite so as, say, December holidays that where you get the, beef Wellington and dishes like that, require a more robust wine. These wines, have the delicacy, but also the acid to, cut through all that fat. So this particular Bourgogne-Aligoté is produced by Denis Bachelet, and so he is a small producer in Gevrey-Chambertin up north in the Côte d'Or and the Côte Nui, and he produces predominantly red wines, and his wines are incredibly scarce. I mean, he only produces, I think, 4 different cuvées, red cuvées, and they go for, hundreds of dollars at least, even for his village wines, and then, close to 1,000 for his Grand Crus. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. But this is his only white wine, and I'm tickled that this great producer chose to make an Aligoté as his only white wine. It's not a very popular grape, as I mentioned. It's been ripped up. It's allowed in the same vineyard land as Chardonnay. As a producer who's bottom line, especially back in the 80s and 90s, these people were, trying to make money. I mean, farming is a hard job and it doesn't pay very well. So a lot of the Aligoté was ripped up to be replanted with Chardonnay. So when you stumble across something like this, you kind of wonder why. And it's just because there's a few producers that really champion this grape. It's for heritage reasons or just for love of the flavor profile and what that brings to the dinner table. So this producer actually has an old vine plot. It was planted in 1986. It's a small, like half-acre plot, and it's just destined for this one little cuvee that only makes it to a few different markets. So let's drink it a little bit more and talk about the smells and flavors. Obviously, we already gave it a little initial impression, and I really like to kind of approach a wine before I even swirl it, give it a quick sip. And that's just to kind of give you a baseline of say, right when I opened it, what does it really smell like? What does it taste like? And then as I swirl it, as I leave it in the glass a bit longer, what starts to change about that? Does it open up? Does it close down? How does, do different aromas come out? Do aromas disappear? And I love to watch that evolution, and it tells you a lot about a wine, really. Some of my favorite people to drink with are winemakers, working in production a few years ago. It's always great to sit with winemakers because they are, first and foremost, very studious about the way they approach a wine. And it tells you a lot. It informs your opinion about, their winemaking style and how they approach, other wines. And some of my favorite wine producers will sit there, open multiple bottles, rarely finish any of them, so that they can go back even the next day and really experience how that wine has changed even over 24 hours. So I'm getting some lemon curd. I really like this wine. It smells, right off the bat, I would say maybe it's a Chardonnay. I would think, maybe a really like kind of up and coming hit producer like Cerritos out of California, maybe. But then right when you sip it, you're like, no way. No way. It's wow, that is acidic. I love it. But it's very like, the acid, it's not pokey, and by that it doesn't jet through the fruit or the other flavors and kind of stand out too much. It is actually kind of wrapped up in the citrus, in the stone kind of qualities, and that makes it I would say it's complex, but it also makes it more balanced. Yes, it's an acid-driven wine, but it's not so acidic to the point where you can't drink it, which sometimes off vintages, cheaper Burgundies, sometimes you get that kind of pokey acid feeling. But I'm a huge fan of this wine, Aligoté. It's much cheaper than Chardonnay, and it's a beautiful aperitif. And if you've ever mixed it with with cure, you get a classic Burgundian aperitif. If you make you mix it with crème de cassis to make a cure, and it's a beautiful crème de cassis. It just gives it. It mixes with the acid and gives it actually a little bit more sweetness, and it's just this beautiful, lovely, refreshing start to any meal or afternoon after a long bike ride along the canals. And I miss Burgundy. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this wine. As we're gonna kind of switch off, because this is different than some of the other tastings we've done where we've had pairs and kind of done a compare contrast. We're just going to kind of switch off with each wine and walk you through. It's a pretty eclectic, but I think compelling mixture of wines. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to my compatriot, Simon Lambert.
Sorry, folks, there we go. Start again. Good evening. Glad you could join us. Welcome. So from the vineyards of Burgundy, we're going to stay in France. In fact, all the wines this evening are from France. We're going to travel north up to almost in the northeast corner of France to the French-German border, to the region of Alsace. And it is there in the north-south strip of vines or vineyards sheltered under the Vosges Mountains that we see wines that, unusually for France, have predominantly on their label the grape variety rather than just the name of the proprietor or the name of the geographic region. And I think this comes partly from the fact that Alsace has historically, because being on the border of Germany, has been annexed a couple of times in history and was German, then back to French, and then back to German and back to French again. And the climate there is such that it favors the grapes that are quite often seen in Germany. So Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Silvaner, Pinot Gris, and that's what Alsace is famed for, those styles of wines, those aromatic, fruity styles of wines. The main difference between the wines of Alsace and the wines of Germany, and this is a broad statement I'm making, but nonetheless, where the German wines tend to focus more on residual sugar and the sweetness of the wine and low alcohol, Alsace in general will ferment the wines drier, so you get a higher degree of alcohol and less residual sugar. So they are more robust, more round, more full-bodied style of wine. The wine we have tonight is the 2018 Riesling from Domaine Weinbach. They are they're a property that was, in fact, the original property. The building itself that is occupied now by the winery was first established as a winery back in 1612 by Capuchin monks. And they planted vines around that area. And the hill that rises up from behind the property is the hill of Schlossberg, which is where the grapes for this particular bottle come from. Now, Domaine Weinbach own about, I think there are only two other owners in the Schlossberg vineyard, and Weinbach own most of the top of the slope, up to about 1,800 feet in the height. And from there, with soil that is granite-based and sandy on top, they have some fabulous exposure and drainage for predominantly in Schlossberg, at least, growing Riesling. I told you it was founded initially in 1612. The Faller family bought the property in 1898, and it's been in their family since then through, I think now going on to 4 generations. In 1993, they started to move all of their operations towards both biodynamic and organic. And now today, all of their wines, all of their vineyards are biodynamic and organic. The vineyard of Schlossberg itself is a Grand Cru vineyard. Now, Grand Cru is a status that was first established in Alsace in 1975. And Schlossberg was the first vineyard in the whole of Alsace to be given a Grand Cru status. There's now somewhere in the region, I think 50, maybe 51 Grand Cru vineyards. So along the lines of Burgundy, you've got specific sites, specific vineyards are now given the Grand Cru specification. So Riesling, one of my favorite grapes. It's a grape variety which produces many different styles of wine, from bone dry, in the case of a Riesling from, say, the Clare Valley in Australia, very light and bone dry style, to extremely sweet, rich, unctuous wines from the Selection de Grand Noble wines in Alsace, to Beerenauslese and Trockenbeerenauslese in Germany, to a similar style of wine in Austria. And so one can experience and enjoy a huge range of styles of wine. In the case of this particular wine, as I said, from the Schlossberg vineyard, from 3 specific plots in Schlossberg at the top of the hill. And this lovely classic, for me, classic Riesling nose. There's flowers, there's a bit of lime in there, some honey. And as Riesling ages, it takes on a slightly oily, or what I refer to as a petrol smell, which I find in a blind tasting is something that I can pick out almost every time, which is great because quite often in blind tastings I get nothing. But it's it's really dense, almost luscious without being sweet. It's dry, it's got a touch of residual sugar just to round it out. Lovely balance, super acidity there, just enough to cut the edge of it so that it's not heavy. Beautiful structure. They also, in the vinification process, they, as many other wines that we happen to like, tend to steer away from new oak. They use large oak vats, and the wine will remain in those oak vats for somewhere between 8 to 10 months prior to bottling. This is a wine their wines we'll see here is just a basic Schlossberg label. I don't know if you can see that in the light or not. Then they will have others that will have a more specific designation on it, indicating a specific plot in the vineyard as opposed to various plots. And then they also have a couple of different single vineyard properties that they own themselves. The most famous one being the one by their own building, which is the Clos de Capucine, a vineyard surrounded by a wall, Clos. Well, by contrast to the wine that Silas poured, which was lively, bright, really grip on the acidity and enjoyable, mouth-watering, this has got much more weight, much more unctuousness to it, without in the least bit being a wine that is overdone or sweet at all. So if you want a wine to go with some of your holiday dishes, that, particularly if you're having lobster, that has this fullness and more weight and length to it, I think this is an ideal choice. So now it's the battle of the white wines, because I'm now going to pass you over to my colleague Gerard, who will try and convince you that his wine is the best of all three. Gerard, over to you.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm Gerard Mechka, and thank you all for joining us. It's great to see a bunch of you who have been kind enough to join us for a second or third time on our recent Zoom tasting. This is a lot of fun, and it's obviously also great to see a lot of new names. Looking forward to new faces, literally faces. You know, hopefully in the not too distant future. So I said it last time on our Chardonnay Zoom tasting that, you know, this is great. Technology is fantastic, and to be able to bring us together like this, and it's so unique to be able to have this at our disposal in 2020. But it will never replace being able to, you know, clink the glasses and share them side by side and across the table from one another. So, but thank you again, everybody, for joining us. So I have really nice, unique bottle of wine, and in my glass I've got the Chenin Blanc from Damien and Laureau, the Belle Ouvrage, 2013. So the wine does have a little bit of age on it, and the color, first and foremost, a couple of things that I noticed right away, even you know, the wine's had a chance to open up here in the glass, but you know, right when I poured it, you noticed you know, really a nice concentrated rich color, and it smells fantastic. You know, it smells rich, but you know, as we'll see, if anybody's you know, snuck a sip so far, you'll notice that that richness does transfer to the palate, but not in an overpowering way. There's so much beautiful Chenin quality to this wine, and we will get there in a moment. And by all means, you know, sip and taste and spell through it. As I talked about Chenin, so we're talking about a grape that's been cultivated for 1,300 years. It's a very versatile grape, and it's a bit of a chameleon. It's kind of gone in and out of fashion over the years. And you can say that about a lot of grapes, but Chenin it's certainly one of the grapes where you can say that the most about. It's noticing a little bit of a resurgence now. It populates a lot of really well curated wine lists, but also you know, we're fortunate to have access to some great bottles of Chenin, and these are bottles that really over deliver. And I think bringing it back to the you know, beginning, and then like Silas said, just the impetus for the tasting. You know, so often, you know, we think that and despite the fact that we all love, you know, fantastic wines, and you know, we all like to you know, splurge on some bottles, and whether we cellar them or they're nicer bottles that we open up right away, these bottles are in the grand scheme of things very attainable. And the fact that every one of these here is beautiful, it's you know, it's its own expression of France, and it's well south of $100 a bottle, some of them less than $50 a bottle. And I think this is a wine that really over delivers, but brings, you know, a lot of the textbook Chenin quality. Chenin's produced in a lot of different styles. It is almost like, you know, Silas said that Aligoté has some similarities to Chardonnay. I think Chenin, at least to me, does have some certainly not direct comparisons, but it does have some comparisons to Chardonnay in the sense that, again, like I said, it's a bit of a chameleon. It has certainly more inherent character than Chardonnay. Chardonnay is definitely a grape that it's at its best when it's in the hands of the right winemaker. But Chinon can run the gamut from sparkling to bone dry to sweet. There's just a lot of different interpretations of Chinon. Most often you'll find it in the Loire and South Africa. Interesting to note that it is heavily planted in California, almost to the degree that it is in France. But it's very rarely handled with the significant care or enough attention to make it a single, a Chenin Blanc bottling. Usually it's bulked out into cheaper white blends. And I think that does Chenin a disservice because as a standalone, it's a fantastic grape. And for those that have had Chenin, most often, most people are familiar with Ouvrage, but today we have a Savennieres, and there's a lot of different beautiful expressions of Chenin. And where I think it really veers, and I'll eventually pass it back to the guys, to my colleagues who can also offer their own opinions on where they think that, where Chenin is most distinctive. But where I think, to me, for me, the telltale of Chenin tends to be some of the more herbaceous notes, sometimes the jasmine, or sometimes I get a ginger or honey quality. And to me, that's actually one of the first things that I smelled. When I smelled this wine, it literally did smell to me like, it definitely has a honeyed quality, not in the sense that it's sweet, not in the sense that it's overripe or overrich, just very pure, very, very nice honey quality. And the grape itself has tons of different expressions. Obviously, if you're making a wine that's sparkling or very dry or sweet, you're obviously going to run the gamut as far as your fruit profiles. They can be tartar fruits, they can be richer fruits. In this case, I think there is definitely a little bit of a baked apple or a poached pear. That's where I kind of come with this wine. But what makes the Loire unique, and this is really good. It's the best wines come from soils where the vines have to struggle, or sometimes in the most extreme climates in the Loire is not a particularly easy place to grow grapes. Very cool, and it's going to require a lot of meticulous farming and a lot of thoughtful winemaking decisions when it comes to everything from before the grapes are picked all the way through, carrying through all the way to the post pick. But it requires sometimes more than multiple passes through the vineyard to pick at different times. And in a perfect world, we think that a lot of the cheaper wines in the world, everything is very, very mechanized. It's kind of a single pass through, and we're going to pick the grapes all at once, and what we get is what we get. But the best wines and the wines that are made with the most care and attention are exactly these types of wines. And Laureau is a great example of a winemaker who his attention to detail is fantastic. And this is a wine that's hand harvested and really, really nice. Let's take a taste and see. Yeah, I think that to me there's some mintiness here, almost like a peppermint or a spearmint, but in a good way. I mean, it's just a nice herbaceous quality, pure fruit, rich, concentrated, but by no means veering towards the wrong end of sweet. Not that sweet's a pejorative, but I just think that this is a really, really nice wine. It smells fantastic and tastes. Yeah, I mean, the acidity is there. It's not intrusive acidity, but I think this is just a really, really well-made wine by an up-and-coming winemaker in his mid-30s who is really, really taking Chenin very seriously and putting a lot of care and attention into this wine that way, way over-delivers for the price. And where I want to toss it back to my colleague Simon, and not only to taste the next wine, but just because, and this is where it's fun. I mean, as much as we all get a Chicago Wine Company, or all of us, sometimes we get exposed to a lot of great wines, but there's still pockets of the world that we haven't explored particularly much of. And for me, that would be South African Chenin. So I want to toss it back to Simon to get his feelings on where, just I'll leave it open ended. Talk about maybe Chenin from South Africa because I'm sure it's a very, very unique expression. I don't have a lot of reference points for that, so I'll pass it back to you not only for the next wine, but also for a little bit more on South Africa.
Okay, so while I'm talking about that, we do have a task for you, and that would be for you to rank these three wines, the three white wines, in your order of preference, and just submit that to us. I think there's a page, Silas, there it is. Okay, just choose your favorite wine of the flight, and we won't hold it against you if you don't choose the one that I like most. So let's get out of the way. Chenin Blanc, yeah, just before so some of you know, my colleagues certainly do, that I spent almost 4 years living in South Africa and was exposed to what was a grape back then that they called Steen, spelled S-T-E-E-N, which turns out to be Chenin Blanc. And it was always just a rather weak, sweet, masses type wine, and of no particular interest whatsoever. And I have found in the last, for me at least, in the last probably 5, maybe 10 years, that there are some unbelievably good Chenin Blancs, old vine Chenin Blancs, that have been grown in the Swartland region of South Africa. So north of the Stellenbosch Paarl region, and of amazing complexity and concentration. And if you see some of those, it's certainly worth locking into them and trying them and comparing them to the Chenin that we had tonight. Going on to back to the Loire for a moment, the Loire, which of course is the longest river in France, has a huge range of wines, from Sancerre in the center of the country through the middle of the Loire, where we'll taste the red in a moment, and then all the way to the coast where Muscadet is produced. And the Chenin Blanc in the central part of the Loire can be a dry wine such as this, or a sweet wine such as the wines from Quart de Chaume, from Bonnezeau, from Cote de Leon. Really, really interesting. My only regret is that the white wines in the central part of the Loire, when you look at the label, you've got no idea whether they're dry or sweet. And I wish they would say either on the front or the back label, to help all of us, including me who's trying to sell it, but also for me who wants to buy some and enjoy it. So that's my little rant on the labeling of the wines from the Loire. Now I'm going to take you, geographically speaking, from the Alsace, where we were, in the top right-hand corner of France, as you look at the map, back down through Burgundy, south through Chalonnais, south through the Macon region and Puy-Puisay, until we arrive at the region of Beaujolais. Beaujolais, for many years, was a wine that everybody would just poo-poo. It was a wine that for the majority of liquid that came out of there was nothing much more than red bubblegum smelling flavored wine that was produced using carbonic maceration. In other words, they plop the grapes into a big tank, they seal the tank, and they ferment it that way. But having said that, and I should also add that there was a story, apocryphal probably, that in the days of Beaujolais Nouveau, when that was the rage, there was probably more Beaujolais Nouveau consumed in Paris than was ever exported out of the country at all, or probably not even made. So it was just a whole mess. But having said that, there are some very serious wines in Beaujolais, and this is one of them. This doesn't smell anything like that bubblegum candy smell that you get from so many ordinary Beaujolais and even Beaujolais Village. This is from one of the 10, I think it's 10, cru villages in Beaujolais. Now, Beaujolais itself, geographically, there's the hills of Beaujolais on the west side, and then they go down to the plains out towards the Saône River Valley. And on the plains is where you get the very ordinary, nondescript Beaujolais. The cru villages 10 of them. Chenas, Julianas, Julianas, Moulin-à-Vent, Fleury, Bruy, Côte de Bruy, I can't remember them all off the top of my head, and Morgon. And Morgon is the second largest of all the crus in Beaujolais. And these are sub-regions in Beaujolais where the quality of the wine, the quality of the soil, and the quality of the fruit that is produced is such that it deserves recognition, and it has got recognition geographically in the wine laws of France, but also with the quality of the wine that comes out of there. The only grape that's grown in Beaujolais for the red wines is Gamay. The full name is Gamay Noir au Jus Blanc, so black Gamay with white juice. And of course, if any of you cut open a red grape, you know that the skin inside, the flesh inside is white, and it's the color that comes from the skin that makes the wine red. Daniel Bouland owns a little less than, I think, 7, maybe 8 hectares of vineyards in Beaujolais, mainly in the Morgon region and a little bit further north in some instances. And all of his vineyards are really, really old vines. Tonight we've got, I think, a very special bottle. This, again, you probably can't see the label because it's very small print on here, but it reads Morgon, Vignes plantées in, I'm going to go into English now, 1926. So these vines were planted in 1926, Gamay vines, and they're the oldest vines that he owns. His other vines are 70 years old, 60 years old in other parts of his holdings. They make minuscule amounts of wine because obviously that age, the cropping itself is by nature reduced dramatically. He hand harvests, again using old wood, no new oak at all, wild yeasts. And on the nose, well, the color first, let's look at the color. I mean, that's not what so many people think of as a Beaujolais color. This is more like a burgundy color. I mean, the depth of color there is really interesting. Nose for me, there's red cherries, black cherries, a little bit of cassis, but then at the back of it, which really makes it so interesting, there's some leather and some really, really complex depth of aromas. Lovely, full-bodied, rounded, soft, gentle, fine tannins, and yet a muscular, quite full-bodied wine. This, I think, if any of you have not had a top cru Beaujolais before, must be, for me it was at least, must be a revelation. This is not your common garden Beaujolais. This is the serious stuff. He made, I think, just under 7,000 bottles of this, which is average for him in any given year. And his wines are well worth seeking out. He has vineyards, as I said, in a couple of different parts of Beaujolais, some on granite soil and some on sandy soil. And he defines each of those on his labels. So he will say Sablé for the sandy soil wines. And we have some of those, we have had in recent offers, some of those on our lists. So drinking really well now, but I would like to put this away and come back to this in 5, maybe even 10 years. And I think you have something which was very, very interesting indeed. So from Beaujolais, we're now going to head back to the center of France, to the Loire Valley, and I'm going to hand this back to Silas for the Chinon. Over to you.
Thanks, Simon. So I love Beaujolais. I'm really happy that you guys were able to, I mean, this is a really challenging cuvee to even secure, honestly, like it, and I'm really happy that I've tried many of his cuvées now, and the depth and the concentration, it's a beautiful rendition, obviously, of the grape itself, but it makes me, and Simon said this, it makes me think more of Burgundy. And I agree. I would love to watch this, progress over a couple of years. The great thing is, it's what, $36 a bottle, so you can, get those, afford to, get a whole case and just watch it, evolve over a decade, and it's a lot easier than Burgundy. Anyway, moving on. Before I start, I do want to say, last time we, were tagged in an Instagram photo of someone's, setup, and we, it's hard for us to, conduct these tastings to a degree when we can't see you guys, and we wish we could. So if you guys, want to snap a picture and show us, if you have charcuterie plates, if you have multiple glasses, if you have friends and family with you, we would love to see photos of, how you guys are experiencing this tasting on your end. So if you feel like taking a quick photo and sending it after the fact, we'd love to see it. So yeah, moving on. So this is Olga Raffault. This is the 2014, this is their Chinon. And so this is, as Simon said, this is the central Loire. This is where a major tributary river comes into the Loire River. And Chinon is in this little sliver between the two rivers. And because of that, many eons ago, those rivers have deposited different benches of sand and clay, and so there's these kind of rolling hills in between the rivers are a really unique tapestry of soils that have been both deposited by the river or just naturally evolved from erosion in the landscape. So this particular site is the highest point in the area, and it's full south facing, and it's a mixture of clay and limestone. So likely it hasn't been, because it's south facing, it's not a river terrace, it's not sandy, likely is, is high enough that it was never touched by the rivers, at least in, geologic reasonable time. So what that makes it is a site that's going to create more depth and ripeness because of the full sun exposure. So right off the bat, let's take a sip. And if any of you know Cab Franc from, American producers, or, even if you're, a dedicated fan to some estates in Saint-Emilion, for instance, that Cab Franc can, come in many different renditions. And right off the bat, I get a little medicinal quality, and I love that. And it's leafy, but it has fruit. It definitely has concentrated fruit in the nose. And I'm going to come back to that glass in a second. So Olga Raffault, when I see this label, this was one of the first wines that made me really think about this grape. And no wonder, because they are one of the most staunch traditionalists in Chinon. And so it's 100% Cabernet Franc, but it's a relatively cooler climate than many places where this grape is grown. It is one of the noble varieties of Bordeaux, and they use it because it is early flowering and relatively hardy. So, in the cold, clay soils of, Saint-Emilion, it will flower early enough that you'll get a nice progression of ripeness and actually ripen your grapes in many years. And it's set apart from the flowering of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon enough that you're kind of hedging your bets if, say, you have hail during budding or flowering. You're not going to lose all your grapes because you've sectioned off enough of your property to different trajectories of growth that one of your varieties is probably going to make it to the finish line. It's a little different story in Chinon because it's a much cooler climate. They're struggling to ripen this early flowering grape period. I mean, it's in many years it's quite leaner than this, and it can be even more leafy and quite have almost a bell pepper pyrazine kind of quality to it. So 2014 was a relatively warm year, And this is relative. It's still not, you're still not going to get the complete degradation of pyrazines, which is the compound that is green bell pepper, and you're going to get a much different flavor profile because of that. You're not going to get a Saint Emilion kind of palate because of climate, because of soil, and probably because of indigenous yeast. These people are very traditional, so they don't use chemicals, industrial chemicals in the vineyard. Everything's handpicked and fermented with indigenous yeast. And more research is showing that a lot of terroir, that is sense of place, actually comes from the interaction with the underlying chemical structure that you get from the place the grapes are grown in and the indigenous yeast. So there was a study that took 50 different strains of indigenous yeast that they took from swabs, and they took a base unfermented wine, they sterilized it, and they inoculated it with the 50 strains. And they did a chemical analysis of the final wine and found incredible variation of the aromatic compounds that we perceive as smell and taste. So more and more of that research is coming out and really showing that. And it makes sense because the industrialization of yeast has really made our wines kind of simplistic. And that was kind of the rise of the international wine style, was using these highly effective yeast strains that would give you a known product every time. You'd never have an unfinished fermentation. Wouldn't have an unfinished fermentation. For those that you don't know, when you have a slow fermentation, you have sugars that kind of invite bacteria and other stuff that are, all too happy to ferment those sugars that the yeast isn't taken care of. So it's from a prospect of a poor farmer, you're like, hell yeah, like give me the sure product. But from the standpoint of wine as art, we're increasingly coming back to the notion that, sense of place, terroir, is a real thing. And we can't take shortcuts, because what we thought was, a shortcut actually just neuters the wine of a lot of that terroir aspect. So back to this wine. Let's take a good gander at this. Oh, it has medicinal, almost going to gravelly, where minerality going to fruit. And I love that it's a cascade on the nose itself, which that should tell you right off the bat, this is going to be a complex wine. If that many smells are hitting you, it gets me excited. Wow. So yeah, not your typical Cabernet Franc that you would have from a different region. Obviously, it has nice acid. It's concentrated, and it's quite tannic. I mean, this is a 2014, and they already hold this wine back for 4 years. They age it in oversized casks. As Simon mentioned, we tend to like producers that don't dress their wines up in a lot of new oak, and that just, oak in its neutral form, where a lot of the compounds have just already been extracted. All the flavor compounds like vanillin, literally what it's called, vanillin will be extracted after maybe 3 to 4 years of barrel usage. Beyond that, you're just getting what we call microoxidation. And so that's just where the porous material of oak itself kind of gives you a slow gradient of gas exchange between the wine and the atmosphere outside the barrel. And what that gives you is just a slow softening of the tannins. And it's incredible that this wine, after 4 years, is still what some critics will call embryonic, and that's just very young. And the tannins and the concentration of the fruit and the other complex elements like the gravel, the medicinal quality, it makes me think that this is going to age very well. And I should know, because I jump on the library releases whenever they're known for releasing, wines that they've aged at their chateau for 40, 50 years. They'll release them onto the market, and whenever I see them, I buy them for myself, because I know these wines after I had a 1977 and a 1978 this time last year, actually at Thanksgiving, and they are one of the most compelling wines I've ever had. The tannins will really, they're polymerized after age, so they get, you know, they get rounder, they get softer, they get sweeter, and that fruit becomes more delicate. The leafiness kind of intertwines with the fruit a little bit more even. So what a lovely wine. I'm a huge fan of Chinon, and this is one of the best examples in my opinion. And a terrible value. I mean, like, it's just a steal. I can't hammer this home any harder. I love Chinon, and it ages so well, but you can also appreciate it with food now. So it just, what a great wine. With that, I will pass it off to my good friend and coworker, Gerard.
All right, so I will walk us through the sixth and final wine of the evening here. And I suspect it'll be the wine, at least from a name recognition perspective, certainly the most cachet, the most recognition, and the one that most are familiar with, and that is Chave. And Chave is quite literally wine royalty. The family has been farming and making wine since 1481. So I'm going to do some quick math in my head and say that's a long time. So 1481, you're talking about multiple generations in the Rhone. And when you think of the world of fine wine, I mean, there's, you know, certainly your first growth from Bordeaux, and you have your legendary names from Burgundy, but when it comes to the Rhone, as much as perhaps somebody like a Chevroutier or Gigal might have more exposure on shelf placement, because they have such a breadth of wines that Gigal and Chevroutier make. I think from a pure qualitative standpoint, and just the lineage that Chave brings, it's as good as it gets. So it's super exciting to be trying the Saint-Joseph from Chave. As most know, Chave is most known for their iconic Hermitage and Hermitage Blanc, and those wines are every bit as pricey as they are collectible. Fantastic, iconic wines. I mean, super singular. But what most don't know is that Chave is the family before moving over to the hill of Hermitage. The family has owned vines in Saint-Joseph, which is on the other side, Hermitage being on the eastern side of the Rhone River, and Saint-Joseph being on the western side of the Rhone River. But the Chave family has owned vines in Saint-Joseph for many years, and there certainly predates their ownership in Hermitage. But Saint-Joseph is a very unique region, because for a lot of reasons, it is now a massive region, and that is both good and bad. There's a lot of really good wines from Saint-Joseph, and there's, unfortunately, just because of how large the region is, there's always going to be some wines that underperform and underdeliver. But the wines from Saint-Joseph are 100% Syrah, and when they are at their best, they can rival the best in the Northern Rhone. They can rival wines, quite frankly. They really can rival some expressions of Hermitage, just despite this prestige of Hermitage across the river. Saint-Joseph is right there with it. But in a very simple way of explaining it, it's, you know, they always say that one of the expressions that you hear in the world of wine is that Syrah likes a view. And so that means that Syrah, you know, if you have some type of view, if you have some hillside vineyard space, there's a chance that good Syrah can grow there. And where Syrah, I don't want to say doesn't thrive, but it makes fairly unmemorable wines, is on the flatlands and in soils that are too vigorous. And, you know, the vines need to struggle a little bit. If there's, you know, it's kind of one of those counterintuitive things that the more nutrients that, you know, the easier it is for the vines to grow, the less interesting the wines inherently are. So Saint-Joseph, in 1956, it's crazy. In 1956, 250 acres in Saint-Joseph. In 2020, today, 30,000 acres. So you get a feel for how much the region has grown. And ostensibly, that growth would be a good thing. But you can imagine that when you were taking what was once a region that was clearly defined, and for a reason, it had that designation, and they were very distinct, very nice value wines. And as the region has grown, you're going to have a little bit more just homogenous wines. But the best wines are those on the granite slopes of Saint Joseph. And the region itself is interesting because at its southern end, it nestles up to Cornas, and then it stretches 30 miles north to south, and then you start getting closer to Condrieu and Côte Rôtie. So, but at its best, the best plots in Saint Joseph, again, elevated hillsides, and those that are essentially looking from west to east across at the hill of Hermitage, and frankly mirroring those soils and having a lot of resemblance to them. Not surprisingly, just the geology is very similar. So some of Guigal's best bottlings in Saint Joseph have those soils that are similar to Hermitage. Same thing with Chave and those vines there. So again, just the region is in a bit of transition because producers like Chave, and this is what's fun about the road, and frankly, this is what's fun about France for as much as we get, and obviously some of the higher end French wines can be certainly very pricey when we talk about Bordeaux and Burgundy and the top flight stuff in the Rhone. But the fact that these top flight producers still make affordable entryways into their wines, you don't see that in California. I'm a big Napa Valley guy, but are you really going to see a property like Colgan or Harlan or those big names? Are you ever going to see a entry level or more affordable entry point into Colgan or Harlan for 40, 50, 75 bucks? Yeah, they make some second wines off that are off of their estate, but even those are allocated wines that are super pricey. This Chave is the Domaine Jean-Louis Chave, Saint Joseph, but it is again the wines are owned by the vines are owned by the family, and they also have a negociant line, which is where they're sourcing fruit from purchased grapes, and you'll see some Chave wines on the shelves for 20, 30, 40 bucks. And while they're clearly not going to be to the level of the Domaine bottlings, it's cool to see that producers like Chave still make authentic expressions of the Rhone at an affordable price point. And that, to me, kind of bringing it full circle, and we'll certainly get into the wine here in a second as I continue to ramble. But the Rhone is super fun because, to me, it's the region, not one of the regions. It's the region that really got me interested into fine wine because of how distinctive and singular some of these bottles can be. Obviously, in the Southern Rhone, the benchmark Chateauneuf de Pape, and in the Northern Rhone, the higher end benchmarks are Hermitage and Côte Rôtie. But in the Southern Rhone, you have great sub appellations like Gigondas. In the Northern Rhone, you have a region like Saint Joseph that way over delivers and still brings an 100% Syrah expression that is super unique, has that old world sensibility to it. And as we get into the wine, that's actually one of the first things that I smelled when I poured this wine about 45 minutes ago. The wine was tight. The wine was kind of very just monochromatic in the sense that it was just, I smelled a little bit of fruit. As that wine sits in the glass, and as I get into it now, and again, we've all had the wine open for probably different periods of time, I get a crazy amount of like beef jerky, and I love that kind of thing. I just love the, whether it be, bacon or cured meats, or in this case, I mean, to me, it really is a beef jerky component. But then you have, textbook Northern Rhone Syrah kind of typifiers like pepper and your floral components, dark fruits for sure. And as we get into the wine, I mean, you can see this is serious wine, but the nice thing about Saint Joseph is, and don't get me wrong, the bottles can certainly last a solid 10 to 15 years. This bottle has muscular tannins, but they're not keeping us from enjoying the wine. I mean, the wine is, it's a 2017, but you can sense the structure. It's there. You can sense the character of the Rhone. And you can sense the wine is certainly going to get better as it ages. And certainly if you keep the bottle open, or if you guys have some samples that you, put behind and try tomorrow. But the wine is really, really enjoyable now and only going to get better. And that beef jerky component is really, really enjoyable to me. I think it's great. And again, we all get different things and different nuances in the wine, but those are the kinds of things that I think make the Rhone so interesting and so singular. So I will pass this back to Silas to kind of wrap everything up, but we're happy to certainly answer any questions. And obviously we'd like to see what everybody thinks as far as their, because I think we had 3 really, really good red wines here. Much different, all that much different. So I'm certainly interested to see what everybody says as far as their favorite goes. So pass it back to Silas here.
Thanks, Gerard. Yeah, and if anyone has any questions, go ahead and use the chat feature and we'd be happy to answer them. We did get one from Richard. Richard, honestly, I don't know. I mean, I love Nicolas Jolly's wine, but I don't know if they have a connection to Daniel Bouland. I mean, I think they're both kind of in the same blend of both, being resurrected as a new, very interesting rendition of Beaujolais. Yeah, too many people sleep on both of them. Let's just say that. I don't know if they have a direct connection at all, though. And we have a question about the ABV on each wine. I can tell you the Aligoté is 12% alcohol. And I'm really happy that everyone loved the Aligoté. I'm a huge fan of the variety, and it's a beautiful rendition of the grape. People will dress it up. This sees actually a teeny bit of new oak. I forgot to mention that, but it tends to be a much fresher, kind of almost baby Chardonnay, and I would highly recommend seeking out other producers' versions of Aligoté. Gerard, Simon, what are your ABVs? I don't have the bottles in front of me.
We'll hop in to say that the Savennieres is 12.5, and I think it's one of those sneaky 12.5s because the fruit is ripe, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges in those slightly more extreme climates like the Loire. That the challenge is certainly getting the wines. The ABVs will be inherently lower just because of the cooler climate, but it's not at the expense of a rich and concentrated wine. I mean, obviously the wine has probably taken on a little bit of weight because it is a 2013 and it's had a little bit of time in the bottle. But 12.5 on the Chinon and 14.5 on the Sancho South. So not entirely surprised by the Rhone being 14.5, but for those that are familiar with the Rhone, being divided north to south, you typically are going to have some leaner, or your wines, generally speaking, won't top 15% in the northern Rhone. I mean, they certainly can, and I'm sure there are those examples, but your Chateauneufs and the southern Rhones are the ones that'll typically be in the 14.5, 15, 15.5. Dare I say 16 on some of them, but the northern Rhone, just because as you're moving north, the wines typically do have slightly lower ABV. So 14.5, I'd say is about right where I expect this wine to be. I mean, the Chave is nice. I mean, it's got some richness. The fruit is clearly there, but it's right where I expect it to be.
And I should say the Chinon is 12.5, which is not surprising. Even in a relatively warm year, it's a very cool climate.
And for me, the Domaine Weinbach Riesling is 13.5, and the Morgon Beaujolais is 14.
Great.
So these are single person drinkers. I think that's what we're getting at is they're lower ABVs, so 1 bottle per person I think is appropriate for the holidays.
Depending on who you're sharing it with. Well, there's one more. Yeah, I agree. The the comment is the Chinon is very interesting as opposed to something one expects on a wine like the Chave. And you know, I have to agree. I think the Chave is poised, as beautiful. It's just beautifully made, period. But it has all the hallmarks. Like there's nothing that kind of surprising about it, except that like you're like, wow, I could drink this all day. Maybe that's the surprise, or that it's young and so approachable. But the Chinon, on the other hand, I mean, God, if you got that blind, good luck. If you're not very like super familiar with the wine, yeah, that's gonna be a challenge because it's just a collection of flavors and aromas that are pretty unique. Let's just say that.
And
go ahead, Simon.
To carry on from what Silas was saying earlier about bottle age with Chinon, absolutely, if you have the ability and the patience to age Chinon and other serious Cabernet Francs, so Bourgogne, for example, also from that same area of the Loire, 10, 15 years, easy. And they will become so much more interesting, so much more complex. Not that it's not interesting now, just and revelation. I mean, I was at a restaurant in Bordeaux with a couple of people, and you're in Bordeaux and you're going to be drinking Bordeaux. Well, we ordered off the wine list, and I can't remember the vintage, unfortunately. I didn't think about this until tonight. An old bottle of Chinon, and it was spectacular. So
yeah, it becomes rather like Pinot-like. It'll drop a little color and look like an aged Pinot Noir and have that kind of delicacy, but also intensity of aroma that you associate with Pinot Noir, but a totally different suite of flavors and aromas.
I think that, you know, as far as the Chinon goes, I think this is a really good, the fact that, you know, this tasting allows us, all of us, you know, not just Chicago Wine Company or our team here, but, you know, everybody that's involved here to really appreciate how integral, I mean, obviously we're tasting, you know, Cab Franc as a standalone, but this, of course, supports the reason. Just seeing that unique quality and the unique character that it brings, that's frankly exactly why that, you know, the best wines of Bordeaux are blends, and there's a reason that, you know, that you know, obviously Cabernet Franc plays such a, you know, vital role on the right bank, but just blends in your classic Bordeaux blends in general, and you know, certainly, you know, even swinging back to the New World with Napa, where you'll see, you know, certainly a lot of 100% Cabernet, but there's also your proprietary reds and your Bordeaux blends that have Cabernet Franc, and you know, there are certain portions in Oakville and in Napa where there's Cabernet Franc that grows exceptionally well, and that's why your Della Valle Mayas and your you know, many of those in Oakville, they have that very, very noticeable Cab Franc quality. And even though it's just a little bit in the grand scheme of things, relative to the, you know, you know, dominance of Cabernet Sauvignon, but there is such a unique character to Cab Franc, regardless of where it's grown. This is fun to drink it and enjoy it as a standalone. But it just speaks to how unique it is as a standalone, but also how integral it is to blends both in Napa Valley and Bordeaux, and frankly everywhere. Just it just kind of just supports how exactly why winemakers blend the way they do.
How about results from our survey, Silas?
Oh, I shared them, but they were overwhelming for the Chave. And we got 1 lone vote for the Chinon and 3 for the Bouland. So I can't blame you. It's the Chinon. It's an eclectic wine, but I would just say if you have the time, go and find an older bottle, honestly, and just buy it and try it. It is a unique experience. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I'd say let's wrap things up. I really appreciate all of you participating, and we have an upcoming champagne tasting. It's a standalone for me. I'm a self-avowed champagne fanatic, so I'm excited for that. And then we'll take a small break for the you know, Christmas and New Year holiday, and we'll be back with more next year. And we have a very exciting slate of tastings for 2021. She'll hopefully be a lot better than 2020. Let's just hope. Well, thank you all.
So I'll take this opportunity to wish you all happy Thanksgiving, and drink well and stay safe.
Agreed.